Good morning, community. I'm Kathleen, one of CBC's pastors. Welcome to today's Bible reading. We are in a series called Here to There, and this week we are looking at the journey from emptiness to satisfaction. And I've mentioned it before, but I love words, and so I looked up the definition of emptiness as that starting place of what we're looking at this week. And emptiness means to be vacant, to be unoccupied, to not have its usual contents, for something to not have its usual contents, and to be completely spent emotionally. And I thought, oh yeah, like exhaustion, to be completely spent, exhausted. That's our here. That's where we start. And I wonder, when have you felt that way? When have I felt that way? I have during this season, and I'm sure I will again. What about you? And the invitation is to that place of satisfaction. And satisfaction means that place of contentment and fulfillment. So we're going to look at a passage in Matthew chapter 14 that speaks of this. And just a little bit of context. I'm going to read verses 13 through 21, but verses 1 through 12 in Matthew 14 give the account of the death of John the Baptist. And so our passage begins with Jesus and also, I'm assuming, the disciples hearing this news of the loss of their dear friend, ministry partner. And so imagine how you feel when you get the news, the loss, the death of a loved one, and how hard that is, and how you respond, how you feel. So it's in that context that we begin Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Listen. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Wow, what an incredible passage of a miracle that Jesus did, a miracle of the way that he provided for his disciples and provided for these people. And there's a number of things that stand out to me. Obviously, the beginning, Jesus received the news, he withdrew to a solitary place, which is probably a good and a very normal thing to do in the midst of deep loss and grief, is just pulling away for time to be quiet with God. And yet somewhere in that process for him, obviously the crowds followed him, and he saw a crowd, it says, and he had compassion on them. And just realizing that out of his own grief and loss in that place, perhaps because of it, he had just deep compassion on the crowd, and he healed the sick that they had brought. So he saw needs and he met them. And at the end of probably a full day of ministry, the disciples were probably exhausted. They obviously had received the news too. It doesn't mention that here. There's a little more context in Mark chapter 6, but we still know, had heard the news, and they were, they realized that the crowds were going to need to eat. It was getting late and evening was coming. They were going to need food. And so they had an idea. So they went to Jesus to let Jesus know kind of their idea of how to meet the needs of people. And I thought, oh gosh, yeah, there's plenty of times I have my own ideas of how, people's needs ought to be met. Jesus had a whole different idea. And obviously the disciples were aware that they didn't have very much. And yet Jesus was like, just bring me the little that you have. So they brought the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he took them. And then it says, I just love this. He took them, it says he looked up to heaven, he looked up to God, he gave thanks, and then he broke the loaves. It's just like this blessing. So Jesus gave a blessing, and out of that blessing, a miracle happened. And the disciples, I don't know how they distributed all that food. I don't know. I don't know how it all increased, but it says that they distributed the bread. Obviously, they distributed the fish, and the people ate and were satisfied. And what's really amazing is that after all that was done, there were 12 basketfuls left over. Like, there was enough for each of the disciples. There was more than enough. There were leftovers. So thinking of that journey, of the journey from emptiness, of exhaustion, of being spent, to a place of fulfillment and satisfaction, and how Jesus takes just the little that I have and blesses it and uses it. And thinking about, what does that look like overall? Because you can't always be in that place of kind of like giving out. And just what I see in this passage is just the rhythm of, obviously, because of the news of the grief and the loss of John the Baptist, Jesus says he withdrew. So he withdrew by himself, then he was with the crowds, and then at the end of, in verse 22, it says that he sent the disciples away, and basically it was kind of like, you've done enough, you go on, you probably need your time, a little bit of space, and I will dismiss the crowds. And then Jesus again withdrew to the mountainside to pray. So this rhythm of solitude, of community, and then solitude again, and realizing, I think that's part of the journey from emptiness to satisfaction. It's being with Jesus in solitude, being with Jesus in community, in meeting the needs of people, and then withdrawing again to be with Jesus in solitude. So part of that rhythm, I think for myself, and I see from this passage, is part of the journey to from emptiness to satisfaction, and being reminded too that Jesus sees. He saw the needs of the crowd, he saw the needs of his disciples, and he was also aware in his own humanity of his own needs. So I'm just going to leave you with that encouragement to continue to reflect on this passage as you consider the journey from emptiness to satisfaction. And if for any reason you're not getting these sent to your email, you can sign up at findcommunity.com/Bible reading. And I hope that you find rhythm in your day, times of solitude, times to be with people, coming to Jesus, seeing needs met, and then returning to solitude with Jesus.